Hi, I'm Amanda Carestio.
I'm Kate Zeinard.
And I'm Meg Healy.
We are the hosts of the Sew and Tell podcast, and we are very excited to start a new series for you called Stitch Lab. In each episode, we are going to cover essential techniques and present inspiring experiments.
I need to put my safety glasses on for this experiment.
Aha.
Oh, great. Wonderful.
That was a lot harder than I thought it was going to be.
Wow.
Welcome to Stitch Lab. We are starting our very first episode with the straight stitch. This is the most humble of stitches, but
such a workhorse.
So useful in so many ways. So let's talk about some of those straight stitch fundamentals.
So with straight stitches, of course, you have your favorite length. Now, most construction lengths is somewhere between 2.5 and 3 millimeters. My machine actually uses stitches per inch. So my favorite is 9, which actually comes out to about 2.8 millimeters. What about you guys? What's your favorite stitch length?
I'm a 3 millimeter kind of gal. I think it just goes a little bit faster. How about you, Meg?
Yeah, I'm at 2.5, but sometimes I get down to even 2 if I'm doing a pant crotch seam because they tend to burst.
Yep, nice and strong.
Right. And of course, there's definitely uses for the different stitch lengths.
Oh, for sure.
I don't know about you. I do that too when I get to collar points. I make the stitch length smaller because it makes it a tighter corner. Similarly, if you're gathering or just basting, you're going to use a really long stitch.
Right, right. So many uses. Let's talk a little bit about how the straight stitch varies depending on what fabric you're using.
Yeah, so the rule of thumb is kind of the thicker fabric, the longer stitch length you're going to need. If you're sewing with a really high pile fabric like velvet or faux fur, you're going to need that extra length to kind of get over the hump. Especially working with papered-like fabrics, vinyl, leather, as well as leather. If you actually have a small stitch length, it will cut the fabric like scissors. So you need that longer stitch length. And then if you're working with a fine silk or just your basic cotton, you want that shorter stitch length.
Got it. And when you are doing the straight stitch, seam allowance really comes into play.
Right.
If you are making garments, the standard is usually about a 1/2 inch to 5/8 of an inch. But if you're doing some of those specialty construction steps, it could be smaller, it could be even larger. Let's talk a little bit about some of those techniques with the straight stitch. The first one is basting, and usually if you are working your way through pattern instructions, it will tell you to baste when you need to baste. And all that means is that you are securing layers together before you do the main final construction step. And it's so you don't have to worry about keeping all of those pieces aligned when you're doing that final step. This is kind of a little bit of pre-stitching. And when you do that, you're going to use a longer stitch length. I usually use about a 4 millimeter to a 4.5 millimeter because these stitches are designed to be taken out after you've finished construction. Although sometimes I leave them in.
I was just going to say,
they're pretty well hidden.
I was like, people take them out.
Well, my tip is to, when you're doing these basting stitches, just make sure your seam allowance is a little short, like a 1/16 of an inch short, and then it'll be within the final seam and you really won't need to.
It's right. And also, something that may come up as you're working through your sewing pattern instructions is Staystitching.
Staystitching. That's the one I always skip.
I was going to ask. So the basics are, you're using a pretty standard stitch length here. I think this is about a 2.5 millimeter, and you are stitching fairly close to the edge. And what you're doing with this is giving a curved edge a little bit of added structure. This is kind of what it would look like if you were working on a collared shirt pattern. So you would stay stitch this. It would support that curved edge so it doesn't stretch out, and then you'd come in later and apply your collar.
And that's because it's basically part of that is cut on the bias, and so it will stretch.
Exactly.
That's what bias cuts do.
Yeah, you can kind of see it here. It's just supporting that area a little bit. All right, well, let's jump into our experiments. We are going to start with learning how to use the gathering foot. We're going to do a little bit of top stitching, and then we are going to experiment with the pintuck foot. I'm pretty excited.
Me too.
Yes, just on the straight stitch. Who knew?
That's right. All right, we've got our lab coats on and we look really spiffy and awesome.
Yes, we do.
Kate and I are coming to you from our Stitch Lab in an undisclosed location that's actually Colorado. And Meg is joining us from her work from home lab in Toronto. Let's get started with these experiments. Up first, the gathering foot.
All right, I'm so excited to talk about the gathering foot, you guys. When I was in costuming, this was just the most amazing tool. Basically, it has a little thing in it that pushes fabric under itself and then stitches it down. And you can change the settings. So for example, this sample right here is stitched with a deep pleat every 6 stitches. So you can tell it's very pleated, it's very neat. But then this sample is stitched with a very shallow pleat every 1 stitch, which just gives it a very casual look. So you can do a lot with this foot just depending on how you set it. So I've set it up over here on the machine with every 6 stitches it will do a pleat, and I think it's a kind of a mid-range size pleat. So let's see what happens with that. So this is a kind of a complicated looking foot, and it does take a little bit of practice to understand. You've got some settings over here, you got some settings down here, and then to actually use it, you need to slide your fabric in this little spot right here. If you want to actually stitch your gathered fabric onto a flat piece of fabric, you'll put the flat piece of fabric under the other piece. And that is very doable.
Sew and gather at the same time?
Yes. Yes, you absolutely can.
Sold.
I know. So I'm going to go ahead and drop the foot, and then I'm just going to start stitching.
Wow.
It just keeps pushing in those little pleats, stitching them down. It's a little clunky, but it's so useful. And so there you have your beautiful little perfectly even pleats. And it's so easy and done entirely with a straight stitch. Ta-da.
So much better than doing it by hand.
I know.
That's one of my least favorite sewing tasks.
So amazing. It replaces, you know, the traditional gathering is like 2 rows of basting straight stitches, then gathering, and then you straight stitch again. So we're replacing 3 stitches with 1. Amazing.
Yes. Yes, that was awesome. And now Meg, I think, is going to tell us a little bit about top stitching.
I love top stitching. You'll find this really prominent if you look at ready to wear or if you sew your own jeans. So top stitching can actually hold things like patch pockets in place. It has a function too, and it is just a straight stitch in about, it can range, but about 1/8 of an inch in from an edge to 1/4 of an inch. But you can top stitch to make things lay flat like waistbands, hold belt loops in place, make seams lay flat. I do that a lot. And adding a little pop of color. I love using contrasting threads sometimes for sure. But what commonly happens with top stitching, you might have a little thicker thread, especially for the jeans. And if it gets really heavy in your machine, try actually winding your bobbin not in that top stitching thread. Just use a regular denim thread. Yeah. So you can see right here, these are ready to wear jeans that I altered. So I had to replace the top stitching, but it was so thick. But on the inside, I just used a blue bobbin thread and I had no issues. It looks great from both sides and holds the waistband down in place.
That is such a great tip.
It's a great tip. And I think when you use that contrast color in the bobbin, it creates a more defined stitch on the top side. So it creates those kind of divisions between the stitches so they really show off. They show off all your hard work.
Yes, they do. Yes.
Now, Meg, do you use a special needle when you top stitch and you're using that thicker thread?
Yes, I use a needle with a bigger eye, and the eye is the opening in that needle where you put your thread in. So you're going to need a longer eye in your needle, and maybe a little bit thicker of a needle too. But that also depends on the type of fabric. Just like stitch length for straight stitch, the thicker the fabric, the thicker the needle that you're going to need.
Right.
Got it.
And they have top stitching needles that are specifically designed for that, right? I think embroidery needles, if you happen to have them, also have a bigger eye.
Yep, I believe you're right. We also have a sample here. This is from an issue of Sew News, and I cannot claim to have created this awesome bucket hat, but you can see the contrast stitching. You know, sometimes I think it's a really useful thing and it does hold those seams down and it gives, you know, that extra security, but it can also just be fun and you can, you know, use all your fun colors of thread in your collection and create a little bit more visual interest. I love this hat so much.
It's so cute.
Oh, I need that hat.
All right, well, let's go ahead and get started with the Pintuck foot next. I'm excited and a little nervous to try this foot out.
Yep, I hear you.
Don't be nervous. It's like doing 2 straight stitches in one go. It's kind of like the gathering foot. Just as cool, but a little bit different, and you get a really cool effect. Just look at those seam lines. They create this beautiful finishing detail. You can do it on shirt blouses. I even have done it on the knees of pants. It's really popular in like athleisure wear, like athletic wear. You see a lot of this and I think it's super cool, but it can take a long time if you actually fold the fabric, then, you know, but this foot does it all in one. So safety first, put my glasses on. And I have a twin needle installed in my machine, and you want to use maybe a 2 to 3 millimeter. You can go up to 4, but sometimes if you use a too thick of fabric, it won't make that edge as well. So you want to have a lighter weight fabric in around a 3 millimeter. And all you do is install the foot. I just release it down. You have the same ankle and everything. You just pop that on, thread up your twin needle with your extra spool of thread, and it's on the straight stitch mode. I know you're gonna wanna press that little twin needle button, but you do not, because this creates the tension for it. So we're gonna go in here, and you just stitch. That's it. And the foot does everything for you. And that kind of tension makes this little ridge, like so. Isn't that cool? And the best part is that the grooves in the foot, if you're doing parallel lines, so I want you to try ones back to back, you actually put the existing little line that you did in one of the outer grooves, and it perfectly, parallelly stitches right next to it.
Yes.
You got it?
That is so cool. Let's give it a try. I think I'm ready. I've got my safety glasses on.
Yes!
It's working.
Ah, that's so cool.
Is it working?
I think so.
It's working.
All right. I'm going in for my second line of stitching. Oh, look at that. Wow, that is so cool.
Oh my gosh, look at how perfect.
I know.
All right, look at that.
That is so cool.
It is not perfect. I want to spend a little bit more time with this foot, but man, that is probably half the time, a third of the time it would have taken me to actually press those and stitch those.
Well, and for your first try, it's close enough to perfect for me.
I'll take it. I'll take it.
Yeah.
It's a win for sure. Okay, we covered a lot of ground today. We walked through using the gathering foot. We shared some top stitching tips and techniques, and then we learned how to use the Pintuck foot, all with the straight stitch.
It's just kind of unbelievable what you can do with just this basic stitch.
I know, we didn't even change the stitch on the machine, just one stitch.
I love that.
All the way through.
I don't know about you guys, but I'm really excited to work more with the Pintuck foot.
Definitely, and I definitely want to do some playing more with the gathering foot now that I've kind of rediscovered it.
I want to play around with some different twin needle widths, so do more lab work. I need to get back in the lab.
Yes.
Exactly. Well, thanks you guys so much for joining us, and stay tuned for the next episode of Stitch Lab.